Archbishop Murray, class of 1970, the Ron Ryan Jr. Community Leadership Award. While working at the Minnesota Daily on the campus of the University of Minnesota, Patricia was given the assignment to interview a Navy recruiter. Turns out the recruiter was really good at their job and ended up enlisting Patricia for a 20-year career in the Navy. Imagine he was cute. A woman of first, she attended the officer candidate school the first year women were allowed. For her master's thesis, she conducted the Navy's first study on sexual harassment, drafted their first policy, and wrote curriculum for the Navy's first workshops to prevent sexual harassment. Patricia coordinated the first Women to Sea program, overseeing the integration of women to serve on deployed ships. She also conducted the first study on how Navy leaders can use their roles to train, communicate, and motivate. Patricia created the Troops to Engineer program at San Diego State that encourages veterans to pursue STEM careers. She also managed the University of San Francisco's Tutor Mentor Outreach program that connects college students with children living in affordable housing. As Deputy Director of AmeriCorps National Civilian Community Corps, she helped match teams of young people with service projects in 6 Western states. A published writer, she is currently the Veterans Service Director at California State University, San Marcos. Her current community service includes advocating for military families and veterans, serving as a trustee for the San Diego Veterans Museum, In nominating Patricia, her dear friend Sally Smith said, "Patricia was always working to improve the lives of others in our community." Commander Reily, this award is especially important to the Hill Murray community. Ronnie Ryan gave his life in the line of duty while serving others. I'm confident that Ronnie and his family, who you're seated with today, are proud to have your name associated with this award. Ladies and gentlemen, the Ron Ryan Jr. Community Leadership Award, Patricia Wappel Reily.
Well, I think I'm seeing a theme here of servant leadership, and I feel so honored to be honored tonight with these wonderful servant leaders who have come before me. Someone very once said, "You can't organize your own ticker tape parade." And I think that's so true. But a couple of my buddies went out of their way to organize this little ticker tape parade for me this evening, and I'm honored they're here tonight. Miss Sally Smith Van Weingarten, oh my, what a friendship we have had. Sally has seen me through some rough patches of life, including taking care of the Jimmer, our son sitting over here, when I was stationed in Yokosuka, Japan, and Jim was deployed. Sally came and spent the summer with me and took her life and my son's life into her own hands by driving through the narrow streets of Yokosuka, Japan, taking him to preschool, and being with him at night when I was called in for crises very regularly on the base. And she was there for me. She's been there for me my entire life, and I love her, and I feel so honored. And I understand that maybe another dear friend of mine, Mary Jo Wojcik Rafferty, also was a little bit of a stimulus for this and egged her on. And also dear Mary Jo, who is here with her high school sweetheart, Doug Hill, graduate, and her high school sweetheart. So nice to have them here. These two ladies are servant leaders. That's to say they're the kind of people who bring out the best in others and facilitate the success of others without drawing attention to themselves. I look around the room and I see many servant leaders, like the educators who we entrust with our children. My sister Bobby is here tonight. Sally, of course, an educator. Mary Jo, Kathy, dear friend from White Bear Lake. Alan, Sally's husband. Roger, and Mary, Tracy. I see those who served our country in the military. My best beloved spouse, Jim, my brother, Ron, my brother-in-law, Joe, and my friend Larry Parker. And then there are servant leaders like Mary Beatas Weber, who after a successful career as an executive at 3M volunteers as the pharmacist on the Minnesota Disaster Relief Team, and she does taxes for low-income people. I see evidence of servant leadership in my children. Our son, Lieutenant James Reily, aka the Jimmer, who risks his life daily to save the lives of others as a search and rescue helicopter pilot in the United States Coast Guard. My daughter, our daughter, Aimee Joy Reily, who is studying speech-language pathology and volunteers her time at a clinic working with children who are speech delayed, as she was. And our daughter-in-law, Michelle, who most recently used her Spanish fluency to assist immigration attorneys with low-income clients seeking asylum in the US. And then of course there's my sister-in-law, Rose, who is not just a servant leader, she qualifies as a saint for managing to stay married to my knucklehead brother for 50 years this week. Many of our teachers were servant leaders. I especially remember fondly people like Sister Mark, Mrs. Odine, Mrs. Hacker, Sister Jean, Sister Jeroma, and our beloved principal, Frank Aschenbrenner. They gave so much of themselves to mold us into the confident, poised young women we were and still are. I haven't been back to Hill Murray since 1974 when I came back to speak to Mrs. Odine's journalism class and the MITRE staff. At the time, I was the managing editor of the Highland Villager, a community newspaper in St. Paul. Mrs. Odine was pleased that one of her journalism students actually chose to pursue a career in journalism. She organized a little ticker tape parade for me when she invited me to come back and speak to her class. Sister Margaret taught us how to outline, a skill I use to this day. She also did that wonderful timeline on the blackboard of a snapshot of history. You know, the one where the creation of the world starts at midnight and then humans don't appear until almost 24 hours later, about a minute before midnight. And the point I think she was making is that in the grand scheme of things, we're all really pretty insignificant and do not be expecting any ticker tape parades. I remember Sister Jean and Sister Jerome performing No Exit, a play by Jean-Paul Sartre, in our lit class. For those of you who aren't familiar with the play, I think it's fair to say it was pretty sophisticated and racy for a bunch of 17-year-old girls in an all-girls Catholic school in 1969. How intelligent and brave those women were to trust they could share such mature content with us. There was Mrs. Hacker. What a good sport she was. Our senior year, a group of us started a little satire performance group and convinced the administration to allow us to perform little skits at school assemblies, which were pretty boring. And this was way before Second City and Saturday Night Live. And how we came up with this idea is beyond me, but Mrs. Hacker was a good target because she taught sex education. And in one of our skits, I spoofed Mrs. Hacker, and I used an exaggerated Our Miss Brooks voice and I drew some pretty funny pictures on a blackboard on the stage as I talked about reproduction. And I remember being worried that how Mrs. Hacker would take this spoof, because I really liked her. And in the middle of the skit, I saw her standing in the back of the auditorium, and she was just cracking up. And the lesson I think I learned there is some things might not seem like a ticker tape parade at the time, but they really are. And if you're being spoofed, it's probably because somebody likes you, so it's okay. Finally, I remember Mr. Frank Aschenbrenner, our principal. He helped to chaperone our senior class trip to the East Coast. Again, perhaps more of a saint than a servant leader. And he took me and a couple of other girls to see the movie Funny Girl because we hadn't seen it yet. And I just remember thinking, wow, what a cool guy. And we felt so special. And I think he made everybody feel very special. At graduation, he said to me, he came over and he said, "Now remember, Patty, don't let anybody rain on your parade." And that was the theme song from the movie. So why did a good Catholic girl join the Navy, and why am I doing what I'm doing now? As was said, I met a recruiter when I was doing a story for the Minnesota Daily, and I got to know some veterans really well when I was at the University of Minnesota. And I enjoyed their company much more than many of the immature college boys who seemed to have such a simplistic view of the world. And several of the student veterans I hung out with had pretty severe PTSD. We didn't have a name for it then, but it was obvious that they were emotionally wounded. And talk about ticker tape parades. There was no ticker tape parade for those young men, and they were men mostly, when they came back from Nam. And it seemed as if our country was taking out its anger over a very unpopular war on these wonderful people. And many of them didn't have a choice. They were drafted. And so one Friday night, after I talked to the recruiter and I was talking to one of my veteran buddies about it and had enough beer, and I said, well, maybe I'll just join the Navy and see the world. And he said, well, you should do it. You certainly are bossy enough to be a naval officer. So I did, and I loved it. I did see the world. I met the man of my dreams, and the Navy sent me off to get 2 master's degrees and a doctorate degree, thanks to the GI Bill. And I don't think I would have had a successful career in the Navy had it not been for my education at Archbishop Murray. I learned not to be afraid to speak my mind. I learned how to organize my thoughts. I learned how to be a decent writer. And most importantly, I learned that women can be leaders. Judy mentioned that my military experience and work with veterans was of interest to the selection community, so I do want to just share a couple quick facts with you, because a lot of us don't have as much contact with veterans nowadays. Only 3 out of 10 young people can even qualify for the military today. Only 3 out of 10. Now, why is that? It's because they can't pass the test to get in, to handle the technology they're going to have to learn about in the military. They physically can't get past the test to get in, or they've had run-ins with the law. Less than 4% of the US population has served or is serving in the military, and that number is decreasing rapidly as the World War II and Korean War generation passes away. Our Gulf War veterans now comprise our largest group of veterans in the country. It was a long war. We have a lot of young veterans. 26 of our 45 presidents have served in the military. The first GI Bill transformed the landscape of college education in our country, making it the purview of the common man, not just the elite. From that group, that first group alone that used the GI Bill, there were 30 Nobel Prize winners. There have only been about 800 Nobel Prize winners in total, and 30 of those came from that World War II generation that went to college after the war. Not to mention the presidents, the folks that went on to lead corporations and go into religious orders and be servant leaders. I love my work in the Navy, but the military is obviously not for everyone. There are plenty of ways to serve others, so why was the military right for me? As a journalist, I became acutely aware that, unfortunately, evil exists in the world. There are those who see our way of living as satanic and seek to destroy it. There are those who think girls have no business going to school. There are those who kill innocents. There are those who use innocence as human shields. We need to be ready to stand up to the bullies who seek to destroy what our country stands for. And remember that it is our administration and Congress, the people you vote for, who get us into wars, not the women and men in uniform. So vote, and vote for the right people. So now, I assist veterans in transition from the military through their use of the GI Bill, which is wonderful. Thank you to you all for the wonderful GI Bill our service members have today. And I work with them to transition them through education into sustainable careers, because I see a sustainable career, a good career, as a cure for a multitude of ills. If you can put food on the table for your family, if you can pay the rent, if you can feel proud of yourself, that's going to go a long way to healing whatever wounds you might have. So it's wonderful, and I thank you for that. And I want to just share you one more story about a servant leader who I think serves in the model of someone like young Ronnie Ryan, who I've learned so much about tonight, and was such a servant leader. And his name, he's one of my students, and one day I received a call from National Public Radio StoryCorps, and they were doing a segment on combat veterans, and asked if I knew of any combat veterans who might like to participate. And my particular university has more veterans per capita than any other university in the country, and a young Marine came to mind. His name is Eric Galvan, and I asked Eric if he might be interested in participating in the StoryCorps interview, and explained that I felt it was important because it might help other veterans who are struggling with PTSD, and it might give insight into the combat for non-military folks as well, because it would go in the Library of Congress. And his reply was positive as always. He said, "Dr. Reily, if you think it will help, I will gladly participate." Well, Eric is a triple amputee. He was 19 years old when he was sent by his sergeant to secure a neighborhood in an urban area so that a platoon of his fellow Marines could move in to fight the Taliban in that town. Eric had a bad feeling about the area he was ordered in to secure, so he radioed his sergeant and told him that he was uneasy about proceeding. His sergeant ordered him to proceed. Eric was blown up by an IED. As many of you know, StoryCorps uses an interview format. In this case, they asked Eric to interview the sergeant who had ordered him into the area where he stepped on the IED. The interview was touching. The sergeant expressed guilt and remorse about ordering Eric to proceed. He described his own PTSD as a result of the incident and his attempt to self-medicate with alcohol for well over a year after the incident. Throughout the interview, Eric was characteristically positive. He assured the sergeant that he did not blame him for what happened. He told the sergeant, "You were only doing your job. I was doing my job." He forgave the sergeant. He and the sergeant are now good friends, and I encourage you to listen to the interview. It's at StoryCorps, and it's in the Library of Congress. And StoryCorps contacted me after the interview was aired and sent me the transcript, and I read the transcript and it brought me to tears. I was so proud of Eric. But after I read the interview, I made the mistake of reading the comments posted by others who read or listened to the interview. I was horrified. One comment was, quote, "This was probably the only job these two morons could get. They got what they deserved." I immediately called up Eric and I said, "Eric, I am so sorry I put you up to this interview. I was horrified when I started to read the comments." And Eric just laughed. And he said, "Dr. Reily, don't you realize you're never supposed to read the comments? Ignore the trolls." Well, Eric, like Ronnie Ryan, is a servant leader, continues to be a servant leader. Happy, he married one of his classmates, a lovely nurse. He went on to get his master's degree, and he is now a counselor with the VA serving his fellow veterans. So I thank all of you servant leaders in this room, and there are so many of you who have served in the military, the Peace Corps, AmeriCorps, as teachers, as healers, as friends. And I thank you from the bottom of my heart for this little ticker tape parade. Thank you.